While I have had gender euphoric experiences, I want to also talk about those kind of everyday hits of joy and pleasure that we have as we move through the world. As, we're just feeling maybe yummy in our bodies.
Welcome to Sleeping Around, where we offer a peek behind the curtain of modern sex and relationship therapy and research, bringing you insights and conversations otherwise reserved for the therapy room. I'm your host, Elena Joy, a Master's of Counseling Psychology student, content creator, and lifelong sex and relationship nerd. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody! Welcome back to another episode of Sleeping Around. I love today's episode. This conversation with Dr. Lucie Fielding felt like a deep breath in, like exciting and inspiring and pleasure-focused, rather than clinical or dysphoric. I'll get into that. But first, to introduce our guest. Today's guest is Dr. Lucie Fielding, a queer, trans-misogyny-affected femme and a therapist. Lucie's also a sex and kink educator and the author of Trans Sex: Clinical Approaches to Transsexualities and Erotic Embodiments. This book was named a 2022 Lambda Literary Award finalist, the winner of the 2022 AASECT Book Award, the 2024 STAR Health Professionals Book Award, and the 2024 APA Division 44 Distinguished Book Award. This book is obviously decorated, and I personally can vouch and understand why. While yes, trans sex is written with a clinical lens, it would be an interesting and informative read for anybody who's interested in sexuality and gender, as you'll get a taste of throughout this episode. Lucie and I talk about gender. We talk about gender pleasure. We talk about gender dysphoria, pleasure versus dysphoria, how to access gender pleasure in sex. We touch on muffing. What is it? Really, this episode is about how to explore and discover pleasure and embodiment in your own body. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I do. Happy listening. I took a course a year ago on gender and sexuality, and in the course, the prof played just a clip of you speaking about gender pleasure and this idea, and immediately after that class, I went and I bought your book. I read it front to back. I started, watching interviews that you've done and just like listening to you speak, and so I was so hoping that I thought, oh, maybe she'll like come to Vancouver and do a talk. Maybe I'll get to hear her live someday. And now I'm here having this conversation with you. And I was in Vancouver like a year ago. Yep. I think that's where the prof, I can't remember exactly, but I think she mentioned that perhaps the audio was from a talk you had given or something. I can't quite remember, but I just was immediately taken by the way that you share knowledge and the way that you speak, and your experience and your ideas, and I'm really excited to have you on Sleeping Around.
Thank you.
So thanks for being here. So I have a lot of things that I'd love to talk to you about, but maybe let's start with you just telling us a little bit about your work in your words.
Yeah. My name is Lucie Fielding. My pronouns are she, they. Please mix them with reckless abandon. I'm white. I'm queer. I'm a dyke. I love the terms queer and dyke because of a concept that I'm kind of like exploring in my work that I call gender mercuriality.
Ooh.
Which is the idea that like certain terms resist being pinned down into like specific gender categories or into sexual identity categories, that it's just kind of like the image that I always get is like, it's like Tinkerbell. And, like every time you try to just like catch Tinkerbell, she's like, okay, I'm going to let you think you can catch me. And then I'm going to like escape and there will be a trail of pixie dust coming
fairy
from
dust.
me. So, yeah. So love those terms because like they're very political terms that a lot of folks of different genders can claim. for themselves, and they speak to communities where expansiveness and experimentation are really celebrated.
When you're talking about the terms queer and dyke and the kind of, I love that word, mercuriality. I have trouble saying it, but I like the concept. It almost is a direct pushback to some of the discussion that I see online over the past year or so is around the fluidity of certain labels and certain words, and how some groups are feeling like allowing fluidity within labels is somehow taking away from various communities. And I really like the pushback to that of like, actually adding people who are able to be a part of these communities, adding ways that people can claim identities and feel authentic and find who they are is, it's nothing but good.
You know, I think about like, when we think about categorization, it's such a tool of white supremacy and of capitalism and neoliberalism. And like, I'm never going to say to somebody like, oh God, that's not a term you should use. For example, like the identity term lesbian doesn't really resonate with me. It has at times, but it doesn't really resonate with me. But like, I'm not going to say that like, oh, that's not a great term. I don't think you should use it. Like, it's a great term. It's a fabulous term. If that fits you, if that fits your experience, go with all that is holy and bright and beautiful.
All the power to you. Yes.
Yeah. Like, I'm not about taking things away. I always want to do like the yes and. Mm-hmm.
Improv? You have an improv background, am I sensing?
Yeah. A little.
A teeny tiny.
I was a theater geek, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. We can add that to the list of identities. Theater kid, self-identified.
Yep.
How would you tie that into gender pleasure? This is kind of where I want to start, because that was the first term of yours that I was really struck by.
So, first of all, I always am about like crediting my sources. The term gender pleasure was one that I first encountered in the work of Tuck Malloy, who's a sex educator, and I believe they're training to be a sex therapist. Woohoo! Because they're going to be a great addition to the field. But they wrote this essay for the first edition of Trans-Sex, and it included this exercise called a gender pleasure history. And I loved the idea of a gender pleasure history. And the more that I kind of like moved through the world and was teaching concepts from trans-sex and talking to people, I'm somebody who learns and works very iteratively and very much in conversation with people. So like my work is going to be changed because of this conversation that we're having. So like, I think where I first started making the pivot to gender pleasure and away from a term like gender euphoria.
That was going to be my question, is how does this compare to the idea of gender euphoria? How are they the same? How are they different? So I love that you went right to it.
Yeah. Gender euphoria is a great concept. It's a great concept. It sounds great. Again, not going to knock it. Not going to knock somebody who's using it. You know, like there are other terms like trans joy. I've heard some use a term like gender good. You know, like these are all great terms. What I felt kind of like lacking with gender euphoria was the idea that one, euphoria, like dysphoria, originates in the clinic. It's a mood states that we use as therapists, as part of what we call a mental status exam. So we talk about mood and affect and appearance and all these kind of things. And I'm always trying to resist clinical discourse coming in to describe our experiencing.
Right.
You know, like I don't like being described in the third person. By somebody, you know, and especially somebody who isn't trans, who isn't queer, in terms of telling me about me. Not to say that there isn't wisdom to be had and to be shared. But like, just that, like, I think that we should be using our own terms. The other thing with gender euphoria is that, like, when I hear the word euphoria, actually, let me ask you, when you hear the word euphoria, what do you think of?
Ooh, I imagine this kind of ecstatic, there's an outward expression of joy and excitement. It's very active. Ecstasy, right?
Yeah.
Like that's, when I hear euphoria, that's what I think of.
It sounds big, right?
It sounds like massive.
Yeah. And what I kind of think is that, like, while I have had gender euphoric experiences, again, this is the yes and.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
I want to also talk about those kind of everyday hits of joy and pleasure that we have as we move through the world. As, we're just feeling maybe yummy in our bodies. Or we're just feeling like I'm feeling this song. I'm feeling the way that my hips are moving to this song. I feel the way that, like, you're going to the gym and another dude just kind of like, up nods you,
gives you the little approval.
Like, that could be gender pleasurable for someone. I mean, or like, you go to Reese Beach for the first time. This is a beach in New York, that is a queer beach. And, and so, like, maybe you go there for the first time and you're suddenly surrounded as far as the eye can see with queer and trans bodies. That could be a huge hit of gender pleasure. It can be about, like, the energies and intentions people are bringing to our bodies and to us as we're moving through the world. Yep. Gender euphoria both felt too big and too small.
Yeah. It almost sounds like it's this big, momentous experience, but it's also almost setting up the expectation that that is what you are to aim for at all times.
Yes. And then, like, what if you were just constantly finding yet another thing to fail at?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, I didn't have this, like, big, massive, ecstatic experience. It's transcendent. The heavens are parting, shafts of light, choirs of angels.
Are singing, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, what if you don't have that? It's kind of like the discourse of body neutrality for me. It's just like, I just want, like, you don't have to love your body. You don't have to love your gender all the fucking time. You just have to pay attention. It's like the difference between sex that's focused on orgasm and sex that's focused on pleasure.
It's something to move toward that would allow for a kind of consistency rather than a drive toward these massive, finishing the marathon or having an orgasm and then it's over.
Yeah.
And then that's it. You did it. Gender euphoria. You've done it.
And again, like, I've had experiences that I would describe as euphoric, but I've had many more that I would describe as just kind of yummy experiences in my body.
Yeah. Does this tie into kind of your work on erotic embodiment?
Absolutely. And thinking about, when I think about the word erotic, I'm thinking about it in the ways that, like, Avgi Sekitopoulou talks about the erotic and eros in her brilliant book, Sexuality Beyond Consent, where it's this both destructive and also generative force. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about the sexual, but it can be sensual. It can be so many other things. But it's like, to paraphrase Lord, the erotic is not what we do. It's how we feel in the doing. And so gender pleasure is part of that erotic embodiment because it's about nurturing a connection to, how do I find joy in the body? Not just how do I avoid distress? How do I avoid or resolve dysphoria? Another element of gender pleasure is that I think cis folks experience gender pleasure too. Just as I think sometimes the way that I think about gender dysphoria, I think that some cis folks experience dysphoria, in the sense that the way that I think about dysphoria is that it's not about like, you know, an internal sense of distress as much as it's like about the feeling, a sense of like revolt or resistance, maybe quiet resistance that springs up in the body when somebody tries to hang a gender story on us that does not fit us. And I think a lot of us, cis and trans, have those kinds of experiences of somebody trying to foist a gender story on us that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, what a reframe of dysphoria. Kind of a step away from, again, the pathologizing of it. I polled my audience before this, asking if there were any questions that they had. There were a lot. And one of the themes was around moving through gender dysphoria, how to, quote unquote, deal with gender dysphoria while having sex, how to experience pleasure when, you know, trying to avoid dysphoria, all sorts of questions like that.
And those are important conversations to be having. I just think that sometimes our focus is more on resolving a problem than recognizing that the problem isn't in us. The problem is in the stories that are being told about us.
Okay.
So like my sense of dysphoria is that like I want that to also feel kind of like empowering, because it's this recognition that something is amiss. Like, good on you for recognizing that something is amiss. You might not be able to name what that is, but you know it.
It's similar to therapeutic conversations around anger and how learning to see anger as a sign that someone has crossed a boundary, right? And kind of good on you for recognizing that. That's step one. So with something like dysphoria, what would be step two?
Okay, so you know what dysphoria feels like. That means you have some sort of embodied awareness of like what dysphoria feels like in your body. So maybe let's not use the dysphoria, but in a sense recognize that if there's awareness of what discomfort feels like, pain, then there are other sensations that we can attune to as well in our bodies. It's not to say ignore dysphoria or like it's not important. It's just not the point, I think, of what I'm trying to do. Resolving or diminishing feelings of dysphoria are vitally important. It's something we should do. But it's like a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition.
Ooh,
like, I want it to be about, like, let's not end with the mere resolution of pain. Let's find where joy lives in your body.
So how might somebody, I have a lot of trans, non-binary, queer folks who are part of my audience, who are listening to this, and I can just hear them, you know, in the comments in my DMs going, okay, but how? You know, yes. And where do I start?
Some of it starts with also recognizing that the pain that we carry, the trauma that we carry, the traumas that we carry, that we have experienced, that we are experiencing, that those are very real, that we have a reason. Those feelings of wanting to run away or to freeze or to fight, you know, or to accommodate, those are all important things to honor. They're not just there as inconvenience. They're there to save your life.
Yeah.
And they've grown up with you around experiences that you've had. And so the question is, like, first, a term that I love from the world of sexological body workers and somatic sex educators, the idea of de-armor. You know, it's that those defenses are the armor that we carry. and that armor is there for a reason. We can't just do like a frontal assault on those defenses. Like you can't just like a lot of clients will say like a wall springs up that like cuts my head off from my body.
Yep.
The more you try to attack the wall, the more it's just going to build itself back up and reinforce itself. So what if you are aligning yourself with those things? And what if our partners are aligning themselves with those defenses? Saying like, thank you for being here. I'm going to do things like engage in certain forms of touch, certain forms of, I'm going to say certain things. We're going to come in with this ethic of like, knowing that like a no is going to be heard and honored. Just knowing that like I can say no and somebody's going to celebrate that no, thank me for that no, is like a huge thing. And then if I'm on the receiving end of a no, like that de-armors me. That hearing that no de-armors me because I know that I can trust a person to say no, because my belief is that, you know, like, and it's shared by many consent educators, you know, that I need to hear no's so that I can trust someone's yes.
Yeah. So you've got, in terms of kind of breaking it down into steps, you have, first of all, a celebration of the recognition of something like dysphoria. So the recognition of a felt sense. Then you've got the acknowledge and affirm. So this experience is there for a reason. It's protected me thus far. This is not, I think you said, this is not just an inconvenience or an annoyance. I can't remember the exact word that you used. And then kind of a thank you, right? And then alignment with the armor.
Yeah.
What a beautiful turning of the way we think about something like dysphoria, or something like a no.
Yeah.
Something like a saying no or receiving a no.
And how that feels in the body. You know, it's not a personal rejection. It's somebody being honest with you.
That's trust.
Yeah, that's trust. Allow me to put this in a sexual context. You know, what de-armoring might feel like.
Please.
Let's say that, you know, like you're doing something with a partner that you've done like a number of times before, but this one time, like your body is just like having a pain flare day, for example. Like a lot of us live with high levels of chronic pain, you know. What if we're having one of those really bad days? De-armoring, what's involved with that is like, well, what if you say like, God, you know, like, I'm so sorry, this isn't really working for me today. Can we try something else? And somebody's like, oh, no big deal. Yay, let's try something else. Let's, you know, like, let's try a different position. Let's experiment and do something else. And if that doesn't work, we can do something else. And if that doesn't work, then we can just stop. And I'm not going, like, I may feel disappointed, you know, that like something didn't happen, but like I can manage my disappointment, you know.
I'm so glad you named that. Yeah. I think that whether you are the person offering the no or saying the no and feeling fear of disappointing your partner, or you're the person receiving the no, just acknowledging that a sense of disappointment, it doesn't make you bad. It doesn't mean your experience is wrong or harmful. But it is about managing and taking responsibility for our own emotions, like disappointment.
Like disappointment, you know, like I get to be disappointed. Like that's not for you to own. I'm not going to put that on you. But like if I planned, you know, like a big date night and it didn't happen, like I get to be disappointed about that, but I'm not angry about it. I'm not like blaming my date that it didn't happen. Like it just didn't happen. Shit happens.
Yeah.
If my date, then can hear like, I'm disappointed, but like, yeah, we'll just reschedule. Be where you need to be. I'm here. Mm-hmm. I'm interested. Let's be back in touch when that feels yummy.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for being honest with me.
Thank you for being honest with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I get to have that disappointment, and I'm not making my date responsible for it. I teach a lot of like sex ed classes, like I teach classes on muffing, for example, and it's like some days muffing is going to be like, I can, do this position and this amount of fingers and this, like things. And other days it's like, like I'm not feeling it.
For folks who are like, muffing? Qu'est-ce que c'est? Could we rewind?
All right. So muffing is, so first of all, it's a term. The term muffing was coined by Mira Bellwether, who wrote the fabulous Sane Fucking Trans Women. But muffing it's a technique that involves, usually with somebody with external gonads. It's a way of fingering somebody from the front, using the external skin of the external gonads, or in folks with outer labial tissue, it's the same kind of tissue, but using that as basically a finger cot to access two orifices that are basically passages through the abdominal wall.
Okay.
And so that are packed, they're fascial tissue that is packed with nerve endings, and turns out you can fuck them. So, so that's what muffing is. And it's something that for some of us can feel really, really good.
Mm-hmm. That's missing from sex ed entirely.
Yeah. I mean, and it can be very gender pleasurable because, it's like when somebody is muffing me, it's like, oh my God, I'm being finger banged from the front, or like if somebody is filling my holes, I'm like, I don't know what being fisted from the front feels like, but I've got to imagine that that feeling of fullness is similar. I don't know, but I'm just like imagining that to be the case. So that's a source of gender pleasure. And then there's also the feeling, as I'm looking at my partner, who is like eyes wide. It's like, when cishet dudes like are with somebody and they squirt, and it's like, I'm a golden god. I did this. It's like, no, you didn't do it, but like, okay, good on you. I'm glad you're excited.
Yeah, you were there too. So that's...
Yeah.
So you do a lot of education, kind of like you mentioned, around sex, but not only sex ed, but like sex practices and how to kind of have these erotic embodied experiences and gender pleasure. Do you have any tips for whether it's trans or non-binary people or partners of trans or non-binary folks for exploring gender pleasure or erotic embodiment sexually?
Yeah. One, there's the gender pleasure history.
Right, you mentioned.
That Tuck writes about. And it doesn't have to be like in chronological order. It doesn't have to go far back. Like many of us, haven't known for all of our lives that we're trans. Some of us have, but many of us haven't. But like, it's like, where do you experience yumminess in your body in and with gender? What are things, what do you notice, like, are things like, for example, I power lift. And I love going to the gym, and I love going in my booty shorts and like a tank top, and like I'm showing off all my tattoos, including my femme and dyke tattoos on my thighs. And, and I sidle up to the rack with next to the biggest douche bro I can find. And then I lift his body weight.
Douche bro, that's 10 out of 10.
And that can be gender pleasurable. That's something to just kind of like, maybe you write a gender pleasure history. Maybe you do like a gender pleasure mood board. Get out the foam core, start like cutting out words and images from magazines, or like stick images to them, or like create like a Pinterest board, or like, a bunch of saved images from Instagram. And these can be things like, this image gives me gender pleasure, is like describes something that gives me gender pleasure, or like something that I imagine would give me gender pleasure. Questions that I tend to ask like clients when they're, like exploring hormone therapies, or they want to engage in like surgical procedures, or, whatever. The question is like, what are you excited about? And what kinds of experiences are you excited or hoping to have? That's a very different question than the questions, say, around medical necessity, which, like, I get from an insurance perspective is important to establish. But, like, again, that's not the point. We do these things for ourselves because we want them. And yes, they tend to resolve dysphoria. So they have, like, there is a medical necessity there, but in terms of the conversations that I want to have with folks, I want the conversations to be about, like, how do we find pleasure in your body? How do we tune into that? What kinds of experiences are you hoping to have? And that can really deepen the experience. Like, let's say that I'm a surgeon and I ask that question of somebody who is coming to me for like a vaginoplasty. So surgically creating a vulva. And if I'm asking that question, then I am deepening into the experience with a client or a patient. And so like I can co-create a vulva with them that is going to meet their desires and expectations and needs. Maybe you don't want to have PIV sex. Maybe like clitoral stimulation is where it's at for you, or the kind of experience, the kind of sex that you want to be having. Maybe it's just about like, I want a flat front. Whatever the answer is, there's no wrong answer there. It's just like, what are you excited about?
And opening up or acknowledging the fact that there are more than one answer, and kind of doing away with the assumption that somebody wants XYZ procedure, or somebody wants to explore XYZ parts of their gender for this very kind of pre-prescribed, prescription of why they would be doing that thing, or what it is that they're hoping to get out of it.
What you're describing, that kind of box is what is a cognitive bias that is so often applied to our bodies, to our experiences. The Gestalt therapist Carl Dunker referred to it as functional fixedness, which is like, he was thinking about objects chiefly, like, you interact with an object in habitual ways and you can't think outside of the box, basically. So functional fixedness is set in. And that's when, for example, we think that like sex needs to look and feel a particular way and involve particular parts and particular genders doing those things,
Or gender needs to feel a particular way or serve a particular purpose.
Or bodies need to look a particular way. Like, what is masculinity? Fuck if I know. Like, they're the stories, but like, I think about gay male masculinities. Like, there's so many ways of like embodying the masculine beyond, it's like, you can be a queen, you can be an otter, you can be, you can be a bear, you can be all these things.
A twink.
A twink. There's all sorts of ways. And so like, how does masculinity live and breathe and move in you? Like, what kind of man are you? What kind of man do you want to be?
Another question that I got over and over again when I was asking my audience what they'd want to ask you was questions around, hi, kitten. Sorry, she's...
No, I love this. I have a fur baby downstairs, named Cersei. She's
Cersei, amazing. No, she sleeps, she's content, but then when she wakes up and hears me talking, she thinks I'm talking to her and then tries to talk back. Yeah. Another theme through the questions that were asked was kind of, how do I identify my own gender? How do I know if I'm trans? How do I know if I'm non-binary? I had one person write in saying, I don't think I experienced dysphoria, but I still am not sure about my gender. How do I know? And this kind of gender pleasure history that you're describing sounds like it could be helpful for so many different experiences.
Because you don't have to experience dysphoria to be trans or experience it in a particular way. A lot of us have complicated relationships with our bodies and particularly our genitals. That complicated relationship, it can be described in terms of what we call bottom dysphoria. So, a form of body dysphoria or body dysmorphia that is kind of constellated around the genitals. I don't experience bottom dysphoria. What I experience, for example, is I experience dysphoria when I feel like having sex with somebody and I can tell that functional fixedness is set in for them. They see my parts and they're like, oh, I recognize that genital configuration. I know what to do with that. And so I'm going to approach it in very habitual, culturally prescribed ways.
Hanging that narrative on you.
Hanging that narrative. Which, doesn't, you can tell. That's when I feel dysphoria. And it's not so much about my parts, it's how my parts are approached. I always am can you approach me with a beginner's mind? Can you approach me as if you have never seen these parts before in your life? And so let's co-create something special with them, shall we? Yes.
Well, and in mentioning not experiencing something like bottom dysphoria, or earlier you mentioned not everyone recognizing their own trans experience, right from jump early on, that for some folks it takes time. Can you speak a bit more to the experience of not knowing and how that's possible, and it doesn't make, potentially someone less trans? Or there's, the prescription of what being trans looks like. Yeah,
I love not knowing.
Ooh, okay.
I love it because, that's a space you can work from, you can explore from. One of the things that I talk about in terms of revisioning eroticism, nurturing erotic embodiment, is leaning into the awkwardness of it all. Swan diving into it, that bodies, sex, gender, Kathleen Bond Stockton, they talk about gender is queer in the sense not only that it's queer, but that it is just weird. Queer as in weird. What even is it at the end of the day?
Great question.
Be in the weird. Be in the awkwardness. We think about adolescence, for example, as this time of acne and bullying. And yes, that was part of my experience too. But also it's this time of awkwardness where you are daily finding out oh, holy shit, my body can do that.
Ooh, discovery.
It's discovery. It's kind of I started talking about gender mercuriality. I like things that resist being pinned down. I don't want to be fully legible to people. I want to claim the right to be always in progress.
Yeah, there is this idea or this sense that especially with something like the word transition, there is this sense that there is a beginning, then you do the thing, and then it's over. And you have now transitioned, and that is the end. Similar to the queer experience of coming out. Yeah. It's you do it one time. What is your coming out story? Your single story of the one time that you came out, and then you've done it The end.
Yeah, how many times did you come out? Because
exactly, daily, like it's constant, right? Yeah. And so this pushback of being in progress and in transition and illegible, fluid, ever moving, evolving is really a great reframe.
And it's not to say that that isn't uncomfortable. And I'm not saying that there isn't fear there, that it isn't scary because it's unknown. We both are tantalized by the unknown, and we're also terrified by it. And I want to honor that terror. It's a very reasonable and appropriate. You are honoring transition by being scared.
Okay, so we're acknowledging, we're aligning. I see what you're doing here.
We're tuning, yeah. We're thanking it for being there.
We're thanking yes.
A dear friend of mine, talks about the difference between, is it painful or is it uncomfortable?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it painful or is it different?
Ooh, that's like a little, that gives me a little almost, that feels invigorating, that question.
If it's painful, don't do it. It's never going to be not painful, right? My friend talks about it in terms of, anal play. If it's painful, it's never not going to be less painful. There's no you get over the hump. But it's that for a lot of us, it's just different because it's not a sensation we've experienced before. It's new. And so maybe we realize okay, this is a new experience that I never want to have again. A few weeks ago, I was playing with somebody and we did something and it was this is gorgeous. You are so skilled. I loved playing with you, and I never want to do this thing that we did ever again. Mm-hmm. It's different, and I have judged that it is not the kind of different that I want.
Yes, it's not the kind of different I want again.
Yeah.
That's, an important, I guess, caveat, or it can be both things. I think the last maybe thing I'd like to touch on before jumping to if you have a few more minutes, I do kind of an extended version over on my Patreon where we answer a few extra questions.
Yeah.
So before we get to that, do you have any kind of tips for somebody navigating a relationship or a sexual experience with a trans or non-binary person, or being a partner to somebody who's gender expansive?
One of the big things is patience, excitement. It is so important to me for me to feel that somebody is excited about my body. When I kiss somebody, I want them to know that I am kissing them. I'm not just kissing somebody.
Your body, not just somebody. Yeah, not anybody.
Yeah, I want somebody to be excited. I want to see that, and I want to feel that excitement. That can be really huge. Ask questions. I think a lot of folks, there's a phenomenon that we talk about in certain sectors of the trans community called dating while trans. And it's when... as a trans femme, you're on a dating app and you go from goddess to ghosted. And the only thing that's changed is you've said that you're trans.
Yeah, right.
And I think the thing that I would say there is that it is, that I think sometimes that is directly about transphobia or transmisogyny. I think a lot of the times it comes down to what my colleague Noah Garcia calls gender fragility. It's that we're so afraid of fucking up that we don't engage. And so it's much easier for us to step back and run away than it is to engage. And what I say is if we're at a point where we're, clothes are going to come off, we know we want to fuck, that is the time to be asking questions about what's going on in our bodies and how we want to be touched and where we want to be touched and where we don't want to be touched and all these things. so much of it is contextual.
And those are conversations to have for any sexual experience.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's so much to be, well, from so many communities. There's so much to be learned from, whether it's the queer community, the kink community, the trans community, whatever it is. You know, we've queerified sex. We've queerified relationships. We do those things almost, well, not almost. We do them out of necessity when we are a part of these communities, because there aren't scripts for us, right? So we build our own. And this almost goes back to what you were saying about the terror of the unknown, but then also like the beauty and the excitement and the exploratory nature of the unknown. It's sometimes, you know, troubling in terms of representation that we don't have those scripts and we don't have those stories, but then it's also exciting because we get to build them. You know, we get to build the experience from the ground up for ourselves. And I wish that those practices were more widespread.
Yeah. So many of us who do not benefit in some way from majoritarian belonging, we've had to come up with strategies. We've had to MacGyver, you know, because the world wasn't made for us. We are not home in the world, right? So what do we do with that? We become ingenious humans who come up with the things, and that excites me.
Yeah.
Because, like, again, I don't want somebody deciding what my body means and what it does and what it can do. I'm the only one who gets to do that. The 17th century philosopher Baruch Spinoza wrote at one point, "No one has yet determined what a body can do." And,
ooh, yeah, that's good. Uh-huh.
And he meant determined in two senses. I'm a philosophy major, so, you know, it's like I do those tease aparts.
Yep.
One, we haven't found out. We haven't determined. We haven't found out. But there's also that kind of less common meaning of determined. No one has yet fated what a body can do. Like, biology is not destiny, as the second waivers would say. You know,
as we determine what our bodies can do, that's where we, I guess, tie into those ideas of gender pleasure and erotic embodiment. That's a really perfect kind of full circle moment. The question that I like to ask my guests at the end here is, if through your work, through everything that you've learned, if there was one thing that you wish that everybody knew, what would it be? I know it's a tough one. So just pick one thing.
That there's so much pleasure to be found in our bodies. I like to say that our bodies are polymorphously perverse playgrounds of wonder. Someone
write that down. Quick, someone listening, write that down.
Our entire bodies can be erogenous zones. Like when I teach muffing, you know, I say to people, like, muffing may not be for you. It may not feel good. It may not be accessible to you for whatever reason, but maybe it tells you that there are all sorts of holes hanging out in your body that you get to fuck.
Mm-hmm.
What if you consider armpits a hole? You know, there's so many routes to pleasure. And I want us just following where the pleasure takes us.
Yeah. Finding what feels good. And leaning into that.
Yeah. Swan dive into it.
Beautiful. Swan dive into it. Uh-huh. So thank you for your time. We're going to jump into the Patreon exclusive extended version where we're going to answer some audience questions.
Great.
Before we get to that, your book, Lucie Fielding's book, Trans-Sex, Clinical Approaches to Transsexualities and Erotic Embodiments. That'll be linked in the show notes and in the description. Is there anything else that that you're working on that you want to talk about or share?
I'm a very wanderlusty femme, and I'm always traveling. And so, like, I go around and I teach muffing classes and all sorts of other things. And so like catch me in a city near you. That's really what I'm excited about, is like really interfacing with readers and with other community members, and having the conversations that will open up possibilities and allow us to dream futures together.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. Let's answer a couple audience questions.
Cool.
Thanks for listening. You can also access all of our extended cut episodes with bonus content from every single guest over on Patreon at patreon.com/AlenaJoy. That's patreon.com/ALAYNAJoy. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at sleepingaroundpod for updates, teasers, episode discussions, and more. This episode was produced by Elena Joy and Danae Fender and edited by Lucian Brinkley. See you next time, back here on the couch.